Massive Impact is a startup focused on helping the consumer understand the complexities of what goes into making the amazing outdoor gear and apparel that we all use. Only in the past few years have I come to think about what I purchased and what that impact was on the environment, the place that I was trying to support. It only recently occurred to me that I might actually be doing damage to the lands that I love by supporting brands who didn't give a. That was a wake-up call for me. And I knew I wasn't alone in not having a center of gravity, not having one place that could be trusted. It became evident to me that I probably wasn't the only one who cared about how the people were treated that were making these items. Our goal is to have as many conversations as possible with thought leaders and influencers and manufacturers and athletes. We're here to tell the stories of those that care. And of course, Patagonia is leading the charge. There are a ton of others, including independent brands that you should know about. This video podcast is just the beginning. Sign up for the newsletter at massiveimpact.co. Join us in this revolution.
I see the merit in the squeeze of parents. No need to sugarcoat it. I see the need for being married, but who would condone it when your dreams of being married?
So welcome to the Massive Impact Sustainability Podcast. My name is Dave Mayer, and we have Margot Johnson here. We will be sitting down with thought leaders and influencers, organizations, associations, and folks who generally care about the outdoors. In particular, we'll be your trusted resource for navigating the decisions around purchasing outdoor gear and apparel that are good for the world. And ultimately, we're celebrating the stories of the organizations that are doing the most good and helping you make intelligent decisions along the way. So thank you for joining us. Maybe we can jump in, and Margot, will you just briefly introduce yourself? And ladies, I will then ask you guys to introduce yourselves.
Yeah. Hi, y'all. Good to meet you, and hi, Nikki. So my name is Margot Johnson, and I'm a social worker and product person by training. And I am very macro. I think about the intersection of social good and impact, business, and technology on my day-to-day basis. And I'm particularly interested in this topic as someone who spends a lot of time outside consuming outdoor apparel and everything from tents to jackets to other purchasing decisions. I'm interested in knowing how those are impacting the world, whether I'm hurting somebody or helping somebody through my decisions. So both as an individual and as a professional, this topic deeply interests me. So I'm glad to be here.
Nice to meet you.
And Beth?
Yeah, well, so my official title is Senior Director of Sustainable Business Innovation here at OIA, but my name is Beth Jensen, and yeah, I've been working on sustainability here at OIA for about 8 years, since 2010, and we can get into a bit of that, the early days of the development of the Eco Index, which has now evolved into the Higg Index, and many other topics as well. But yeah, I just, I in my professional life, I really want to make sure that I'm doing something that has real impact, or is driving real impact reduction, I guess I should more accurately say. And so, previously to OIA, I was in the natural products industry, helping push forth the original movement around organic and natural foods. But I'm an avid outdoorist. And so when this position came available, I jumped at the opportunity to try to, push forth sustainability in a real meaningful way through this industry, that, like you, Margot, I love. So yeah, it's been a really exciting and entrepreneurial sort of project over the last 8 years, and much more to come. So.
Awesome. Thanks.
Yeah.
And Nikki, I guess that leaves you.
Yeah, so my name is Nikki Hodgson, and I'm the Sustainable Business Innovation Manager at OIA, working with Beth. I've been here for about 5 years, and my background's in environmental science and policy. And before coming to OIA, I was working in the environmental NGO sector, specifically around climate. And I was really just seeing this big disconnect between all of this great advocacy work we were doing and the impact the industry was having on these same lands that we were working so hard to advocate to protect. And I had initially gotten my start in the outdoor industry, and so I just felt that it was maybe time to focus on some of the actions that the private sector could take, and definitely was eager to kind of get back into the industry and to really what is my sense of community.
Awesome. Well, thank you for that. I think in general, where we'd love to get to know you guys, we have a bit of background. What inspires you on a daily basis? You know, what drives you to wake up and be excited about this work that can be incredibly challenging at times? And you know, I'd love to hear a little bit more about you, so both on a professional and a personal level.
Yeah, that's a great question. I feel like I have a number of answers to that question. A few that come to mind offhand are just first of all, the people that we get to work with out in the industry are some of the most brilliant and just genuinely, authentically concerned people that I've ever had the opportunity or pleasure to work with professionally. So, you know, it's people who are in the outdoor industry who have a real passion for the outdoors and for leaving the world a better place, and for really digging into these tough challenges, you know, in their daily jobs and fighting what's often an uphill battle, to really make change in the supply chain, in the supply chain that's really evolved over the last, you know, 100+ years. It's not easy. It's not easy work, and it's easy to get discouraged, but, you know, I just feel so fortunate every day to be able to pick up the phone and call, you know, frankly, my friends who are working out in our outdoor industry association member companies out, you know, sitting at their desks, trying to, you know, do this work, you know, and then, you know, being able to connect with them and really collaborate to solve these shared supply chain challenges in the industry. So that's one piece of it, you know, and I think the other piece of it too is that there's no playbook for what we're doing here at OIA and in the outdoor industry, really, around supply chain sustainability. It's a very entrepreneurial type of role that we get to play. And so one of the things that I often talk about is the reason that I'm still here after 8 years, or one of the many reasons I'm still here after 8 years, is that there's no set path for this work. We're sort of making it up as we go along. And I say that loosely because it's making it up as we go along, but also making really thoughtful and informed decisions as we go along to really lead in this area in a way that really no other industry or sector has done as consistently over the last 10+ years as our industry has. So, you know, I really feel like it's such an interesting opportunity and such a big set of challenges to solve, you know, that no one person or company is going to be able to solve alone. And yeah, there's certainly not a set path for doing this. And that's what keeps it interesting and exciting for me.
Yeah, I think I would echo that. I mean, definitely the people and the sense of community.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there's just this really powerful sense of community, and, you know, we're a small industry. We're a collection of small to medium companies, but I think people are so invested and so passionate that there's a sense that we can really influence things. We can really show some leadership and just inspire change. And so I think to be a part of a movement or a community like that is really inspiring. And it makes it, when things it can be really overwhelming, and it can be very challenging to try to figure out, you know, how do we identify best practices, or how do we find solutions for some of these problems. But when you're surrounded by such an inspiring community of people, I think that definitely makes it a little easier, or just makes it feel really, really engaging and good. And I think the other piece for me too is just the places that we play, you know, these places that I love, and that I'm, you know, privileged being in Colorado to get out and experience every day. And I think just being reminded, you know, when we're out there, that this work that we do every day is helping to protect these places and these communities and really just identifying, better business practices so that, the gear that we're making isn't coming at the expense of all this advocacy work and all these lands that we're working to save.
Mm-hmm. So I'd love a little more context on OIA for people who aren't familiar with the organization. You guys do a lot of different things. Can you give us a little bit of detail about overarching what the organization does, and then also what you're excited that you're working on right now? Maybe what's happening in 2018.
Sure. Why don't I start with that one, and then I'll kick over to Nikki on the Higg Index introduction in a bit here. But so OIA, we're the premier trade association for outdoor products and services companies. So brands, retailers, suppliers, and other service providers that work within the outdoor sector. We have 1,300 member companies. We're based in Boulder, Colorado, with an office in Washington, D.C. as well for our lobbying and advocacy efforts. And we basically work under three key pillars. So the first one is that policy and advocacy work, so government affairs and really advocating and lobbying for causes that will benefit the outdoor industry. So that's everything from protection of public lands to international trade issues to climate change policy, anything that really affects the business community within the outdoor industry and supports the outdoor businesses that are our members and our places to play where those products are being used. That's really the sort of policy work that we focus on. The second pillar is outdoor participation, so increasing participation in the outdoors and giving opportunities to perhaps underserved communities to get out and enjoy public green spaces and recreate in the same way that, many of us in Colorado are just so fortunate to be surrounded by these places to play. Many other areas in the United States don't have the same opportunities, so really trying to increase that access. And then the third pillar is what we work on, which is what we call our Sustainable Business Innovation Department. And we'll go into a lot more about that as well. And so, part of what I'm excited about, I think, from an overall OAA perspective is, there's been a lot of conversation and discussion around protection of public lands over the last couple of years, in particular with the Flashpoint, Bears Ears, and Grand Staircase Escalante National Monument, and those issues of being reduced by the current administration. And I think all of those issues, one of the silver linings that I would see is that it's really raised the awareness of the outdoor industry and of OIA specifically, and the fact that we exist, and that we exist to support the outdoor industry and to support these businesses, really in a nonpartisan way, I would say as well. So, previous to all the public lands issues, I would talk to friends about what I do, and they would have no idea what a trade association is. There's trade association supporting every industry out there, including outdoor. And to be honest as well, I probably didn't have a great sense of that before I joined OIA, what a trade association actually does and what this network of trade associations in the United States, and around the world really does. But yeah, after all of these public lands issues, I think we've really raised the profile of the industry and of what we do. And that gives us a really interesting opportunity to raise the profile around the sustainability leadership as well. I think that the industry has shown over the last 10 years.
Awesome.
I don't know if you have anything to add to that.
No, I think that's a pretty good overview of OIA.
Yeah.
I'd love to, before we jump into the Higg stuff, I think it's an important thought and idea that this is apolitical, and that there are folks from both sides of the aisle that are fighting this battle. Forgive me, I'm getting some sort of recording warning here, so let me see if I can. Yeah, I think we just sort of roll with it, but if you guys wouldn't mind jumping into that and helping us understand, the reality of that, that would be super interesting, I think, for a lot of folks to hear.
Sure. I'll start. I guess, have always considered ourselves a nonpartisan industry. And so our government, and this is really more a question, that our government affairs team could go into in depth, but, really we work with both Republicans and Democrats, champions of outdoor recreation to, advance the causes of the outdoor industry. And we have, some of our greatest champions, are, on the more conservative side of the political spectrum. And because they recognize that in their states in particular, outdoor recreation can be a significant economic driver. So one of the key reports that OAA puts out every several years is our outdoor recreation economy report. And the last version of that was released last year showed that the outdoor recreation economy is an $887 billion driver to the U.S. economy, and also creates 7.6 million jobs in the United States. And so, armed with those numbers and then armed with the individual state level numbers, and even we now have numbers for the economic impact of the outdoor recreation industry in each congressional district in the United States. So armed with those numbers, our government affairs team is really able to go in and show the hard numbers, the financial benefit of investing in the outdoor industry in these different communities around the United States. So, we really have found success, in many areas, not everything, of course. And, again, the public lands issues of late are an example of where we feel, perhaps the current administration is somewhat misguided on pulling back a lot of that. But overall, we have some great champions on both sides of the aisle, and I think it's really important to continue focusing on the outdoor industry and our issues as really nonpartisan issues.
That's awesome.
Well, I know I'd love to dive in a little bit more to some of the sustainability leadership that you were talking about and hear a bit about how that connects to different tools like the Higg Index, which you can tell our audience what that is, and maybe give some examples of what does it look like to be a sustainability leader in this space? How do you know if you're doing well? And maybe some tangible examples of companies that are really putting their actions where their interest is here and starting to move forward in the space.
Want to take that one?
Yeah, I can definitely dive into the Higg Index and kind of how we use that and why that's so important when we talk about sustainability in the industry, and then also kind of communicating that out to consumers. So we got our start as a collaborative group about a decade ago, and really the objective of this group was to figure out a way to harmonize how we're talking about sustainability and how we're assessing sustainability. So what does environmental and social responsibility look like in the supply chain? And then, how are we assessing that? And then how are we communicating that? And there was some confusion, I think, in the marketplace because we were digging into this and different companies had their own rating systems. And so what's, a 7 for Timberland or, the Patagonia's Footprint Chronicles? It was just like, how do we compare this when it's apples to oranges? And so we came together to identify a tool that will allow us to assess environmental and social responsibility in the supply chain. So everything from raw material sourcing to end of life. And then basically give us a common method of assessment and then a common language to be communicating that both internally to our business partners, but also to consumers as well. And so that first tool was called the OA Eco Index. And then a few years ago, we gifted that to the Sustainable Apparel Coalition, which was a partnership between Walmart and Patagonia. And they took that tool alongside a few other tools and created what's now called the Higg Index. So that's kind of the history and background. And I think, we get questions of like, oh, there's so many tools out there. Why the Higg Index? And it's like, well, it really did get its start in the outdoor industry. And so that's kind of the connection there. But I think why the Higg Index is so powerful is it's a really holistic tool. So it's actually a suite of tools. So it has a module for brands and retailers. It has a module for factories, and it has a product module as well. And so basically it allows all players in the supply chain to be using this common tool to assess what's happening on, kind of their own different side of things, and then communicate that with one another. And then also communicate that to consumers. And right now it's really a self-assessment. So we're working on verification. So that's why you're not seeing Higg Index labeling, on the product yet. We are looking at that. So that's definitely something that's coming. But for right now, we really wanted to make sure, let's get this tool in place and figure out how it works and what works best on the self-assessment side of things before we bring in verification and then start to communicate that to consumers. But I think, within the next few years, you'll definitely be seeing more of the public facing aspect of the Higg Index.
Yeah, very smart. So what are you learning so far with the Higg Index? What's going well, and maybe what are some of the biggest challenges that companies are finding as they're going through it?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we actually just released our first ever benchmarking report or sustainability report for the outdoor industry. We released that at Outdoor Retailer Summer Market. So that's a great resource that's available on our website for folks to kind of dig into and learn a little bit more about how the Higg Index is helping us in terms of data. But I think one of the biggest advantages as a trade association is we're able to see the collective data of the outdoor industry. And so in these sections, whether it's packaging or transportation or end of life, products care and repair, we're able to see how the industry as a whole is performing. And so I think how that's helping us is it's giving us a data-driven way to see where are we maybe where are we struggling a little bit as an industry where we could pool our resources and use what we do best, which is collaboration, to improve our scores. So I think, there's some big issues for us. It's hard to pinpoint one specific topic, whether it's chemicals management or microfibers. I think some of the bigger challenges we're seeing is how does a small company address that? And that's, we're a collection of small to medium companies. And so I would say when we're thinking about challenges and what are some of the challenges that are being identified by the Higg Index, we're seeing kind of these bigger issues in the supply chain, but really it's like if you're a small company, you don't have a director of sustainability, you don't have a sustainability team, you're just kind of trying to keep the doors open. How do you ensure environmental and social responsibility with fewer resources than maybe some of the Gaps and Starbucks of the world?
Yeah. It's a little harder for you to influence an entire supply chain if you're not ordering as many items. Yeah.
That's right. And just when you don't have the capacity, as Nikki said, to really dig into these complicated issues in your supply chain, as a small brand. And we have some examples of companies that are doing a great job with that, but it's really challenging. And so one of the things that we try to do at OIA is provide this sort of what we would call getting started resources or how-to guides that really try to simplify these different areas. Like chemicals management and like materials selection, responsible materials selection and like social responsibility and fair labor issues. So that's really, the majority of our companies really within Outdoor Industry Association are those smaller companies because there's just hundreds of them in the outdoor, thousands of them really in the outdoor industry. And so making sure that we're supporting them as well as supporting our larger members who are dealing with their own challenges in terms of having a much, more disparate supply chain and having to deal with just broader issues of scale, which are probably equally challenging, so.
And will you talk sort of generally, please, about the Sustainability Working Group? And obviously, one of your biggest priorities, I'm under the impression, is to foster the adoption of the Higg Index across all of your members. And maybe talk a little bit about that and why you decided that as a priority, and then what else the SWG is working on these days.
Sure. Do you want to start with the Higg Index, kind of what we've seen for adoption so far, and then I can dive into the other priorities?
Yeah. So we launched our first ever Higg Index adoption campaign for the outdoor industry last year. And so what we're seeing with that, I think we're at 130 outdoor industry companies who have adopted the Higg Index, which is great, for our first ever year. So I think, we're definitely seeing increased adoption. It'll be really interesting to see. We're tracking this from year to year. So I think within the next year or two, we didn't have a brand module this year, because we were updating it, but next year we'll begin tracking the numbers again. But I think, for us in terms of why is that a priority? Why are we asking companies to adopt this? I think it goes back to those earlier conversations, when we were first in a room kind of figuring out, how do we identify best practices around environmental and social responsibility? And the answer was, we really need a common tool. We need a common way to assess these issues in the supply chain. I think the other thing too that we've seen is that the Higg Index really offers a strategy, right? It gives you a big picture look at your supply chain. So when we talk about a robust sustainability strategy in a program, I think for us, the first step is really completing the Higg Index. So you can kind of see what's happening in your supply chain, how are your factories doing? What are you doing at the product level? So, before you really kind of know which areas you should focus on. So I think for us, we see this as, Hig Index adoption is a long-term plan, right? If you're very serious about developing a robust sustainability strategy for us, that's really the first step. But it also allows us, as I said, to see that benchmarking data and to really have a data-driven way to focus our collaborative efforts. So I think for us, it's really a strategic move around long-term sustainability efforts at both the company and then also at the industry level.
Yeah. And so using the Hig Index as our sort of common shared definition of sustainability, so to speak, in the industry, that's the first piece of our strategy that we talk about in the sustainability working group. So we talk about our efforts in terms of assessment, and then moving from assessment into action, and then moving from action into innovation. So those are kind of the three buckets that we operate within for the sustainability working group. So assessment, as Nikki just talked about, our primary means of doing that is through the Hig Index. And then we have a number of different sort of sub-working groups, I guess I would say, that look at different specific topics and what are the actions that actually need to be taken in the supply chain to address these shared challenges. So we have a group that's focused on chemicals management issues specifically, and then even diving into specific chemicals issues like water repellency and flame retardants that are now required to be placed on camping tents. And then we've got another group that's looking at climate change strategies. So how can we utilize our shared supplier structure, essentially? So all of our member companies are really using the same suppliers to make their products. How can we get all of those folks together to sort of share these efforts in terms of energy efficiency in factories, or just things that can directly impact or reduce impacts in the supply chain? So we have a number of different topics like that. Another one around microfiber shedding. That's another big issue for the outdoor industry right now. So we have a very active working group working specifically on that topic, and again focusing on so not just talking about the issue, but actually taking action. So what is really needed for the industry to drive impact reduction in these specific areas? So in the case of microfiber shedding, for example, we are convening the industry to pool their funding to support needed research that we're missing right now. That's not allowing product designers and developers in the industry to make informed decisions about the fabrics and fibers they're choosing, because we don't currently have a good way to measure what's sort of better or worse in terms of shedding and shed rate. So those types of issues, and really focusing on what are the actual impact areas and how can the outdoor industry have tangible impact. And then moving into innovation, and that's a little bit more nebulous, but it's basically just really thinking about how do we continue to be leaders in this space? How do we bring together players that at first glance may not seem to be connected, but once you bring them together, and using OIA as a sort of hub or a forum in many ways, can we bring together those different players to really start to tackle some of these problems? So from the academic community and from the research side of things and from the startup community, and how can we sort of bring these different parties to the table to help address some of these shared challenges in the supply chain? So assessment to action to innovation is what we work on in the Sustainability Working Group.
Awesome. And I'm happy to, I'm excited to sit down with you guys on the innovation side of things, just because of my deep connections in the startup realm around the country, and love to be of assistance where I can, for sure.
That's great. Yeah.
I know Margot had a question at the beginning that I thought was really interesting about sort of walking into an REI and how to do that. I don't know if you want to rephrase or re-ask that question. That was super interesting.
Well, and I know that OIA is a bit more macro in the sense that you're working with all these member organizations and helping them guide their efforts and understanding their own sustainability and leadership and the kinds of actions they can take. So the consumer is kind of another level down from that, but I'm sure you have people coming to you and asking questions about that. So I'm curious about thoughts on consumer education generally. When I walk into the store and I pick up a camping tent, it's never occurred to me to think about the flame retardant qualities and how that goes back into the supply chain. And I'm curious, as a consumer who also needs to make a decision within, give or take 20 minutes, depending how nice the tent is.
Yeah.
What what can I be thinking about? What's kind of the short checklist as I'm building my muscle as a sustainability conscious consumer? What can I be thinking about or asking that company if I have a question?
Well, I'll start with that. So to me, the simplest answer right now, until we have consumer-facing labeling around the Higg Index, because again, the Higg Index and that whole suite of questions is really designed to be the industry's shared definition of what sustainability looks like. What are good business practices in the supply chain? Until that happens, and I would even say when that does happen, whatever that ends up looking like, to me, the more important consideration is the brand even thinking about these things? Is the brand even engaging with the Higg Index? Has the brand submitted their brand module into the Higg Index process for the year? Because every brand is going to be in a different place in each of the different sort of impact areas within the Higg Index. So, one might be focused more on, water use and wastewater discharge if it's perhaps like a denim factory, or one might be more focused on the flame retardant issue if it's a camping tent, or, if it's a fleece jacket, they might be really concerned about the microfibers. So it's really difficult to weigh each of those against one another. So even when we do have a sort of way to communicate general ranges of Higg Index scores, which is what the communication will likely look like, to me, that's still even not as valuable. It's just knowing whether or not a company is engaging with this process and engaging with the collaborative community within the outdoor and broader fashion industries or not. Because there are so many companies that still are not engaged with this, that to me is the number one piece of criteria. And you can go online to any of the brands that you're looking at and find out, are they members of the OIA Sustainability Working Group? Are they members of the Sustainable Apparel Coalition? And are they using the Higg Index? And there will soon be better ways to determine that information as well. I think Sustainable Apparel Coalition, one of the things they're working on, along with the labeling process around the Higg Index, is what are the communication guidelines around, how to talk about this, even if that sort of verification process isn't in place yet, because of course, any sort of scores or claims that are made have to be verified by a third party before those can be actually made, in a verifiable way. So that's why when we talk about verification, that's what we're talking about, is basically that third party assurance that what is being claimed is actually true. So that's what needs to happen before we can do a lot of consumer-facing communication. But look at whether or not the company is using the Higg Index. Honestly, would be my first piece of advice to any consumer looking at a specific product or a brand, and go from there.
And we'll link the Sustainability Working Group members below.
Perfect.
Same with any information you can send us on folks who have already adopted Higg as well.
Yeah, great.
Yeah.
Did something to add?
I was just going to say, the Sustainable Apparel Coalition is currently piloting sort of these transparency messages. This is what we're calling as transparency, which is really just consumer messaging. And so I think we'll start to see stuff a little more public facing beginning as early as next year.
Yeah.
So experimenting with that. So this isn't, something that we're talking about, 10, 15 years down the road. It's definitely coming. And I think, one piece that we're also seeing too, in terms of how it pertains to consumers, is the role that retailers play. And kind of engaging with their vendors and their brand partners around some of these sustainability attributes. So I think, when we're talking about consumer engagement, I think the retailer has a big role to play as well, and just sort of vetting and asking those sustainability questions. Because I agree, I think that's one of the big challenges, is that there's so much information. And even the Higg Index is an aspirational tool, right? It's not a standard or a certification. And so, it's 100 is the best that you can do, but that's like the absolute best aspirational practices. So I think there's just so much information. And if you're a consumer, and you're trying to make a decision in a store, that's a lot to dig into, even going to a brand's page and reading through their 40-page sustainability report. So I think there's definitely some engagement and, some work that we could do too as well to help support retailers around sustainability and communicating that to their consumer.
And just to give an example of that, so REI right now has put out their vendor sustainability standards, essentially. So they're now working with all of their 1,000+ brands that sell into REI to promote brands, engaging in these sustainability practices. And so that is just a really great model, I think, whether it's a one store mom and pop shop or a large retailer like REI, Mountain Equipment Co-op up in Canada has done a similar effort as well with their vendor community, with their vendor partners. And, so I think what Nikki's really driving at is at some point, we see a real, a vision of success in the future is any retailer, whether it's a brick and mortar store or whether it's an online retailer, is essentially doing that vetting for you. So a consumer doesn't have to go and get into all of these, super technical details of trade-offs of different sustainability attributes that a brand might be engaging in. But, if you walk into an REI or you walk into your local outdoor retail shop and just know that they have a process in place for working with their vendors and selecting vendors based on their sustainability practices, among other criteria. To me, that's a real vision of success for the future because then it just simplifies it, the decision-making process for consumers.
Right. And we certainly intend to be of assistance as well in driving traffic to the folks that have adopted.
Yep.
HIG and Blue Sign, and ultimately for us, B Corp is a measure as well.
Mm-hmm.
And so, and obviously that'll continue to iterate over time. So we're excited to continue to learn from you guys.
Yeah.
As we start to wrap up, I think we'd love to hear. Obviously, you mentioned REI. Everybody knows about Patagonia and their high standards. Are there some smaller brands, some independent brands, and or just sort of successes in general that you guys would point to as really leading the pack or doing something truly interesting and unique? And are there some areas of challenges that you would like folks to really know about and places you would like people to be putting more efforts and time? Understand it's a big question, and maybe start with the challenges perhaps and end with the successes.
Sure.
Definitely.
Yeah. Well, I'll start with, so we get asked this question all the time, like who's doing the best in the outdoor industry? And my first response to that to everyone is there are a lot of companies that are doing great things that just they're not set up in the same way that Patagonia is to be able to talk about them in the same way.
Yes.
So Patagonia is great, no question. They're a leader in the industry. They're also very adept at talking about what they do, and they have a consumer base and frankly a corporate structure, being privately owned, where they can, they have the ability to go and say, all right, well, here's what we're doing. Here's what we're still trying to find out. Here's what we're working on. And they've built a consumer base that, will respond positively to that. Now, I think a lot of other companies in the industry are looking at that model as well and starting to take on some of that model too within their own communications strategies, because they're realizing that, unlike other sort of a traditional communications approach, this is never going to be all buttoned up. Like, you're never going to be able to talk about it in a way where it's all buttoned up. It's done. We're done with sustainability, and so I think that more traditional communications departments and approaches are starting to think a little bit differently about how they communicate around their leadership or what they're doing in these areas. So that's just one thing I'll say is that there are a lot of companies doing really great things, really admirable things. Yeah. That maybe just aren't as good at talking about it or aren't as comfortable, I would say, at talking about it because of all these trade-offs, right? One company might be really focusing on chemicals management. One company might be really focusing on material selection, responsibly sourced down or wool, if those are key issues for the specific products that they're making. I will say we have a number of smaller brands that have really sort of taken the torch and run with it. Within the sustainability working group and have really committed to being active sustainability working group members. A couple examples would be Clean Canteen and Mountain Khakis. And what are some other good examples?
Yakima.
Yakima is a smaller company. Hard Goods.
Burton, for sure. They're not small necessarily, but I think, they're kind of in that hard goods space, and they really took it and ran with it within the first year.
They did. And they actually are really leading in terms of the snow sports industry in particular. And so really kind of dove in with both feet into the sustainability working group and are in many ways leading that sector, I think, in sustainability practices. So, tons of great examples, and those are just a few. So, we have really about 40, what we would call our leadership member companies, and those can be found on the OIA website. So take a look there, because we really consider those guys the leaders in the industry in many ways. So I'm sure there'll be a link to that later. And then in terms of and then in terms of challenges, I think, one of the things that Nikki mentioned earlier is just the challenges faced by the many smaller companies in our industry in terms of tackling this range of issues that they need to be working on, and even just tackling the Higg Index to start, which is, a pretty complex tool, actually. And so, we're, as I said earlier, spending a lot of time trying to think through what are the resources and support needs that they have, and how can OIA, provide support for those smaller companies in particular. I don't know if you have anything to add.
No, I mean, I would say that for sure. I think the Higg Index right now is our biggest focus, and that there's some challenges with that too, because I think, we've seen some of the larger companies begin to adopt it, and now we're seeing more and more smaller and medium companies get in there. And I think, it is a complex, robust tool looking at your entire supply chain. And so that for us, I think would probably be the ask, knowing that, as a smaller company, it is, I think to get that set up and to have that system set up to begin to complete the tool is definitely a little bit of a lift. We're here to support, obviously, but I think that would be one of the bigger challenges, but definitely our biggest ask.
It does sound like the more that value is seen from a kind of quasi-marketing perspective to I'm in the store and I'm on my phone and I'm looking up this is a cool small company. Are they using the Higg Index? That's even more of a push to say this is really valuable, and it's going to show people, help us, give us the way to talk about all of our hard work. So sounds incredibly important for a lot of reasons.
Awesome. Nikki, Margot, any final thoughts?
No, I think this was great. We covered it all. I look forward to seeing everybody at Outdoor Retailer Winter Market. And then for those consumers out there, definitely stay tuned and check out our website for some of the case studies that we talked about, like Clean Canteen and Yakima. And then, you'll definitely be hearing more about the Higg Index in the next year or two as we roll out those consumer-facing communications and labels.
Yep.
Awesome. And your website is?
outdoorindustry.org.
/sustainable-business, actually, to get to our topics.
Awesome. Yeah. And as you may know, ours is massiveimpact.co. Thank you for being here. Super grateful for your time and all your efforts. And we look forward to seeing you in November.
Sounds good. Thanks, guys.
See you then.
Thank you. Keep up the good work.